So in Joshua chapter 6, we read about how the Israelites conquered Jericho. And the chapter opens up with, in verse 1, it opens up with an issue, a problem. So the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. So Jericho was on guard. They knew that Israel was approaching and wanting to conquer the land. So they were in preparation of that. They did not allow anyone to come and go in the city gates. So God told Israel that they were going to conquer Jericho. But when Israel approached it, it seemed to be something that was unattainable to the human eye. And so sometimes in life, God will give us a huge task, or maybe God will give us a huge promise that seems so unattainable. And in actuality, when we try to go after these things on our own without the guidance of God, yeah, that is unattainable. But we can rest assured that God loves us and He sees us and He will be with us. And if He says that He will be with us through a difficult time and see us through, then He will. And now when you read verse 2, and I know this is a very popular thing that has been preached, so you've probably heard this before. God gave Joshua very specific instructions, and He told him exactly how they were going to conquer Jericho. And Joshua could have easily said, that's a silly plan, or I don't want to do that, God. Or he could have changed it a little bit and thought, well, maybe if I obey God in this way, but just do this one thing differently, then maybe God will still help me, overcome Jericho. And we have to be careful in that thinking. We have to be careful in partial obedience, because partial obedience, and I've heard this recently, I don't know where, but partial obedience when it comes to God is still disobedience. In order to obey God, we have to obey Him fully in all things, in all ways. And so Joshua was humble enough to know that, yes, Joshua was this great man of God and God was with him. And the people, if you go back to the chapter before, the people looked at Joshua in such an honorable way. And that could have went to Joshua's head. And Joshua could have thought, well, I'm Joshua. And, we can just go barge in there. Kind of like Saul. I've been reading through 1 Samuel. And Saul, he, had a very huge ego. Saul was very egotistical. And he thought that he can do things his way because of the power that was bestowed on him. What Saul didn't realize fully was that all of his successes was attributed to God and God's hand in his life. And so you'll see here with Joshua, he understands that. He's not letting the people look at him in a great way as a mighty man of God and letting that go to his head and think, okay, well, now I can do things my own way. No, he's not looking at it like that. He's got the humility to know that his strength is because of God. And so he needs to listen to God, and so do we. We need to listen to God when He's telling us to do certain things. There's been certain periods in my life where God will tell me, you need to do this. I feel like I'm there right now. There's something that I really don't want to do, but I know that God is calling me to do it. It will take up a lot of my time. It'll take up a lot of my energy, focus. But I know God is calling me to do that, and I just need to be obedient in that and do it. And so Joshua, he's not letting his status, his current successes right now go to his head and think that he's above God and doesn't need to listen to God, and that, he could do his own thing and God will still bless him, as we sometimes do. But he is listening to what God has said, no matter how silly, and I say that very lightly, but no matter how silly it may seem, because it's not about the process, it's more about trusting God through it. And so in verses 2-5, God reassures him, see, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. Well, let's just backtrack. Just the beginning, verse 2. The first verse says the gates were securely barred. And then the Lord said, look, I've delivered Jericho. So again, that's not looking with our physical eyes. That's looking with spiritual eyes. So even if it seems daunting, even if it seems like, okay, God, I don't know, I know you told me this, but nothing's happening right now. Just trust the process. Trust God. So I thought that was a really good lesson to be learned there. And with verses 2-5, where God tells Joshua that they need to march around the city once with armed men for 6 days. Very specific instructions. Have 7 priests carry trumpets. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times when you hear a loud blast. And you know what else that I just thought of as I'm reading through these steps? I was thinking these are such specific steps. And sometimes with God, we want that specificity when we're going about life and living life with God. But notice that God did not tell Joshua all of this back when they were crossing the river. Remember that a few chapters ago when they had to cross the river? Let's go back for haha's sake. So in Joshua 3, when they were about to cross the Jordan River, God didn't say at that point, oh yeah, and when you get to Jericho, you're going to have to do this, this, and this. Because I found that God will tell us things incrementally, one step at a time. And so God gave Joshua these instructions right before he went, right when he needed it. And we got to trust that. Joshua wasn't back at the Jordan River thinking, okay, but how are we going to cross this Jordan? And then how are we going to conquer Jericho? And how are we going to... No, one step at a time. Reel it in. Reel it all the way in. Yeah, so that was just something else that I thought of with Joshua. So God will give you the steps and the instructions and the guidance that you need. But sometimes we are looking for those steps and instructions and guidance out of place. He will give you what you need for today. Give us this day our daily bread. Give us our instruction for today. So verses 6-21, Joshua instructed the people and they listened. They went in, they destroyed the land just as God had said. And Joshua cautioned Israel to spare Rahab and those in her home. Remember Rahab, she helped the spies. And so they said, you and those in your home will be spared. So he kept his word. And they were to leave their idol gods. And so in verse 22, Rahab and her family were spared. And then in verses 24-27, they burned the entire city and Joshua's name was spread throughout the land. So one thing with Rahab, though, is they told her that she needed to leave the idol ways behind if she wanted to come and worship their God. Then they had to go ahead and leave their idol gods behind. Another thing that I thought of is that Joshua kept his word. And that's important. Sometimes we help people, or sometimes people help us, and then we will just move on and not keep our word. Maybe, we said, okay, you've done this for me and I'll be there for you at a certain time. It reminds me of when Joseph was thrown into prison and he interpreted the dreams. And the cupbearer said, when he interpreted the dream for the cupbearer and the baker, this is in Genesis 40, the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He told Joseph, I will go back to the king and I will remember you and tell him, to spare you so you can get out of here. He totally forgot about that. It wasn't so with Rahab. They kept their word. Joshua kept his word and Rahab and her family were spared. So yeah, that's pretty much what I got out of this chapter. Please let me know what you learned. I love reading your comments. I post a new Bible study video on Wednesdays and Fridays at 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I can't wait to study the Bible with you again.